He built an empire on the paranormal. He turned ghost hunting into a career worth millions. And somewhere along the way, the line between the investigator and the investigated began to blur in ways that even his most devoted fans struggle to explain. Subscribe and stay until the very end, because what we're about to cover goes far beyond what any headline has managed to capture about the man, the mythology, and the quietly complicated reality of Zak Bagans at 49 years old. Zak Bagans was born on April 5, 1977, in Washington, D.C. He grew up in Libertyville, Illinois, a small suburban town in Lake County roughly 40 miles north of Chicago. By his own account, he was not a particularly extraordinary child. He was athletic, socially functional, and by most external measures, unremarkable. There was no family tradition of paranormal investigation. There were no early mentors who shaped his worldview around the supernatural. What there was, according to interviews he has given over more than 2 decades, was a single encounter. A single moment that he claims restructured the architecture of his belief system entirely. He was in his early 20s living in Trenton, Michigan, working a job that had nothing to do with television or production or fame. And he says he saw something that he could not explain. Whether or not you believe that encounter was real, it matters. It matters because it is the origin myth of everything that followed. It is the foundation stone upon which he constructed not just a career, but an identity so total and so consuming that by the time he reached his late 40s, it had become nearly impossible to separate the man from the persona. Ghost Adventures premiered on the Travel Channel on October 17, 2008. But before the series, there was a documentary. Bagans and his longtime collaborator Nick Groff produced a self-shot film in 2004. Shot primarily in the abandoned mining town of Goldfield, Nevada. That documentary, simply titled Ghost Adventures, circulated through film festivals and built enough of a following to attract television interest. It was raw. It was low budget. It had the kind of unpolished urgency that made it feel genuinely dangerous in a way that slicker productions could not manufacture. And that rawness was the thing that Travel Channel wanted to bottle. The series that followed ran for over 20 seasons across nearly 2 decades. It produced more than 200 episodes. It spawned multiple spin-offs, including Ghost Adventures, Screaming Room, Ghost Adventures, Quarantine, and Deadly Possessions. At its commercial peak, Ghost Adventures was one of the highest-rated programs on the Travel Channel, pulling in millions of viewers per episode during its strongest seasons between 2012 and 2016. Bagans became, by any honest accounting, the single most recognizable figure in paranormal entertainment in the United States. That is not a small thing. That is a specific kind of cultural dominance that very few people in any niche ever achieve. And yet, the lifestyle that came with that dominance is where the story becomes complicated. By 2015, Bagans had purchased the haunted museum property in downtown Las Vegas, Nevada. The building at 307 West Charleston Boulevard had a history. It had served as a private residence, as a law office, and had sat vacant for years before Bagans acquired it. He began converting it into what he described as a permanent installation of cursed, haunted, and paranormally significant objects. The museum opened to the public on October 16, 2017. It operates today as a ticketed attraction running tours of roughly 45 minutes, with a separate ticketed experience for what Bagans calls the most dangerous room in the building, the space containing the Dybbuk Box. The Dybbuk Box is an object that Bagans acquired in 2015. It is a wooden wine cabinet alleged to be a vessel for a malevolent Jewish spirit. The previous owner, Kevin Manis, had sold it on eBay in 2003 with a written account of paranormal activity surrounding it. It passed through multiple hands before Bagans paid a reported amount in the tens of thousands of dollars to acquire it. He documented the acquisition on camera. He said during that filming that he felt immediate physical effects upon contact with the object. He said he became sick. He said his health declined in specific, measurable ways following extended exposure to it. This claim is worth sitting with, because Zak Bagans has made versions of this claim many times across many years, about many objects and many locations. And the pattern of those claims is one of the most revealing things about how his lifestyle has evolved and what it has cost him. In 2009, Bagans investigated the Poveglia Island location off the coast of Venice, Italy. Poveglia is a place with an unambiguous historical record of suffering. It served as a quarantine station during the bubonic plague in the 14th century. It later housed a psychiatric facility that operated until 1968. Hundreds of thousands of people died on that island across several centuries. The physical soil of the island contains measurable concentrations of human ash and bone fragment, the result of mass cremations during the plague years. When Bagans describes Poveglia as one of the most evil places on Earth, he is describing a location that has genuine historical claim to being among the most concentrated sites of human misery in European history. The paranormal interpretation is his. The historical reality is not. He reported feeling possessed during that investigation. He reported that something attached itself to him at Poveglia and did not fully let go. He filmed the aftermath. He showed on camera changes in his demeanor, his voice, his behavior. His colleagues expressed concern. His producers kept cameras rolling. This became one of the most watched episodes of Ghost Adventures and one of the most analyzed pieces of content in the show's long history. This is the lifestyle that Bagans chose and then built a business around. Repeated, voluntary exposure to locations of extreme historical trauma, combined with a personal belief system that those locations retain spiritual energy capable of attaching to and affecting living human beings. Every year, for over 2 decades, that is not a job. That is a vocation with physical consequences. Bagans has spoken openly in interviews across multiple platforms about chronic health issues. He has described persistent headaches, fatigue, mood instability, and what he characterizes as periods of darkness that descend without clear environmental cause. He has referenced these episodes in interviews with outlets including Entertainment Weekly, Rolling Stone, and in his own written works. He has attributed some portion of these experiences to the cumulative effect of years of paranormal investigation. He has, on several occasions, described feeling as though he is carrying something that other people cannot see. Now, that is his interpretation, and his interpretation exists within a belief system that a significant portion of the population does not share. But here is what is undeniable regardless of where you stand on the question of the paranormal. He has spent more than 2 decades in locations characterized by extreme physical conditions, including asbestos contamination, lead paint, compromised structural integrity, black mold, and in multiple international locations, documented biohazards. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky, where he has filmed multiple episodes, treated more than 63,000 tuberculosis patients during its operational period from 1910 to 1961. The air quality in that building during filming is not the air quality of a television studio. The abandoned prisons, the decommissioned hospitals, the centuries-old cemeteries in rural locations across the American South and Midwest, where ambient particulate matter from decomposed organic material enters the respiratory system without ceremony or warning. The physical toll of doing this work repeatedly in these specific environments over 20+ years is real regardless of anything supernatural. And Bagans, to his credit, has never pretended otherwise. By 2018, something in his public profile had shifted. He had always been intense, but the interviews from that period, taken in aggregate, showed a man under a different kind of weight. He spoke more frequently about isolation. He spoke about the difficulty of maintaining personal relationships given the demands of the show and the psychological texture of the work. He had ended a relationship with actress Holly Madison in 2016 after approximately 6 months of dating. Before that, there had been other relationships that had not sustained themselves against the pressure of his particular lifestyle. He has never married. As of 2026, he remains unmarried, without children, living in a custom-built compound in Las Vegas that he has described in interviews as being designed specifically to accommodate his unique psychological requirements, including multiple rooms dedicated to the containment and housing of objects from the museum's collection. Think about that for a moment. He lives in a house designed in part as an extension of his work. The objects follow him home. Or rather, he has built a home that makes space for the objects, because the objects are not separate from who he is. They are who he is. In 2020, during the early months of the global pandemic, Bagans filmed Ghost Adventures, Quarantine, which documented the investigation of his own home while the world was in lockdown. He was alone with a small crew. The outside world had effectively shut down, and his response was to turn the cameras inward. He filmed himself in his own space, hunting for evidence of the paranormal in the rooms where he slept, ate, and existed. He described the experience as one of the most disturbing of his career. And given his career, that is a sentence that carries considerable weight. The special aired on the Travel Channel in June of 2020. Viewer response was, by rating standards, strong. Critical response was more divided. Some reviewers noted that the content of the special seemed to reflect a man genuinely grappling with something beyond the theatrical. Others read it as an exceptionally well-produced piece of performance. The truth, as is so often the case, likely contains elements of both. What is not in dispute is that Bagans used one of the most disorienting periods of collective human experience in modern memory as an opportunity to go deeper into the specific psychological territory that defines his life. When the rest of the world was trying to escape, he was trying to find more of the thing that had always pulled him toward the dark. His film work complicates the narrative further. In 2012, Bagans produced and narrated Demon House, a documentary concerning a rental property at 3771 Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana. The property had been the subject of a widely reported case involving a single mother named LaToya Ammons and her 3 children, who claimed to have experienced severe paranormal and demonic activity beginning in 2011. The case was unusual because it involved documented engagement from the Indiana Department of Child Services, the local police department, and a hospital whose staff members reported witnessing unexplainable events involving the children. These are not anonymous civilian claims. These are institutional records. Bagans purchased the house in 2014 for the reported price of $35,000. He and his crew filmed inside it for months. During that filming, he claims that members of his crew experienced physical and psychological effects, including injury, emotional breakdown, and in at least one documented case, a crew member who left the project abruptly and suffered what Bagans described as a sustained mental health crisis in the aftermath. Bagans himself, by his account, experienced a period of such severe personal disruption during the filming that he considered halting production entirely. The film was released in 2018. Before its wide release, Bagans demolished the house. He demolished a property that he owned, that he had purchased for the purpose of documentary investigation, before the film based on that investigation had reached its primary audience. He said he did it because it was dangerous to leave standing. He said he felt an obligation to prevent others from being drawn to it. The reaction to that decision split along the exact lines you would expect. His believers saw it as an act of moral responsibility. His critics saw it as the destruction of evidence. Both reactions are logical within their respective frameworks. What the demolition accomplished beyond the obvious was to ensure that no subsequent investigator, journalist, or researcher could independently examine the physical space. The story of 3771 Carolina Street became, at that point, entirely dependent on the documentation that Bagans chose to release. That is a pattern worth noting. Across his career, Bagans has operated in an unusual position of simultaneous subject and narrator. He investigates the story. He controls the footage, he edits the footage, he releases the footage on his own terms. And in the case of Demon House, he literally destroyed the primary physical artifact before independent verification was possible. This is not an accusation. It is a description of the structure within which his most significant claims have been made. Now, at 49, the accumulation of these choices is visible on him. If you watch interviews from 2010 and compare them to interviews from 2025, the change is not subtle. The younger Bagans was animated in a way that carried the energy of someone who believed he was on the edge of proving something historic. The older Bagans carries a different weight. He is still articulate. He is still precise. But there is something in him that has settled into a kind of permanent certainty that no longer requires external validation. He does not seem to be trying to convince anyone of anything anymore. He seems, instead, like a man who has long since stopped expecting the world to follow him where he has gone. He has spoken about his diet in interviews, describing an approach to food that prioritizes what he calls clean eating, with restrictions on alcohol and processed foods, that he connects directly to his belief that physical purity affects his capacity to perceive and interact with paranormal energy. He exercises regularly. He has described a sleep schedule that is deliberately structured around his work cycles, which often involve late-night filming sessions that push his body clock into patterns incompatible with conventional social life. He does not keep conventional hours because his work does not permit conventional hours. The lifestyle is total. His relationship with social media has been, by the standards of his industry, unusually controlled. He uses Instagram with consistent frequency, typically posting images related to the museum, new investigations, and personal reflections that maintain the same tonal register as his on-camera persona. He does not perform a separate, lighter version of himself online. The public Zak Bagans and the social media Zak Bagans are the same person. Whether that represents authenticity or an inability to code switch is a question his audience debates with remarkable intensity. The museum has, in recent years, become the most stable axis of his professional life. Ghost Adventures has continued, but the pace of production has slowed from the pace of peak years. The museum operates continuously, independently of filming schedules, and generates revenue from ticketed admissions in a way that does not require Bagans to be physically present or emotionally available on any particular day. It is his legacy project. It is the thing that will exist after the television cameras stop rolling, and it is, arguably, the truest expression of what he actually believes about the world. The museum contains over 30,000 square feet across multiple floors. It houses artifacts including the original diaries from the estate of Zak Bagans, whose work on physician-assisted death in the 1980s and 90s generated enormous public and legal controversy. It contains a custom-built car that belonged to Bruno Hauptmann, convicted of kidnapping and murdering the infant son of Charles Lindbergh in 1932. It contains materials connected to Ed Gein, John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, and multiple other individuals whose names are synonymous with American violent crime history. It houses a significant collection of items connected to reported hauntings from across the United States and internationally. This is not a novelty collection. This is a carefully curated assemblage of objects connected to human suffering, violence, death, and the alleged persistence of negative energy. And Bagans lives in its orbit. He acquires new objects. He studies them. He sometimes films their arrival and their effect on him and his colleagues. He has built a physical monument to the darkest chapters of human experience, and he tends it daily. What does that do to a person over time? Not in the paranormal sense. In the purely psychological, purely neurological, purely human sense, what does decades of sustained focus on death, violence, trauma, and the spaces where those things occur do to the architecture of someone's inner life? This is not a question that the Ghost Adventures franchise has ever fully sat with, because asking it too honestly would destabilize the entertainment premise. But it is the question that rises to the surface every time Bagans gives an unguarded interview, every time he describes the darkness he carries, every time he explains why he has built a life that keeps the rest of the world at a particular distance. His friendships appear to be few and deeply maintained. Aaron Goodwin, who has been a core member of the Ghost Adventures crew since the early seasons, remains one of his closest associates. The bond between them, documented across hundreds of hours of footage, shows something genuine underneath the theatrical frame. They have argued on camera. They have expressed fear on camera. They have, at various points, expressed what looks very much like real concern for each other in moments that the editing did not fully smooth over. Jay Wasley, who joined the crew as an audio technician in the mid-seasons and became a full investigator, is another sustained presence. Billy Tolley, who has worked with Bagans for over a decade, is another. These men do not simply work for Bagans. They share the specific psychological experience of doing this particular kind of work in these particular conditions, and that shared experience creates a kind of bond that is difficult to replicate in conventional social environments. But this is also part of the isolation. When your closest relationships are with the people who do your exact work, when the shared language of your social life is the language of your professional life, the barriers between self and role begin to dissolve. You stop being a person who does a job and you become a person who is the job. This is not unique to Bagans. It happens to soldiers, to surgeons, to law enforcement professionals who spend careers in violent environments. The difference is that most of those professions have institutional support structures, mandatory psychological evaluation, peer review, and collective professional standards. Ghost hunting, as a discipline, has none of those things. It operates entirely outside institutional frameworks. There is no licensing board. There is no professional oversight. There is no mandatory debriefing after a filming session in an asbestos-heavy building in the middle of the night. This has created a situation in which Zak Bagans, at 49 years old, is a man of genuine accomplishment, genuine influence, and genuine wealth, operating in a psychological landscape with very few guardrails and very few people positioned to offer him anything he has not specifically requested. His net worth has been estimated by multiple financial publications at between $5 and $10 million, with some estimates placing it higher based on the museum's continued growth and the licensing value of the Ghost Adventures catalog. He owns significant real estate in the Las Vegas area. He has production infrastructure. He has a brand that extends across merchandise, digital content, and the museum admission business. By conventional measures of American professional success, he has achieved something substantial. And by conventional measures of personal life, he has arrived at 49 without a partner, without children, with a lifestyle so singular and so consuming that the question of what comes next does not have an obvious answer. He has, in interviews, expressed something close to contentment with this arrangement. He has said that the work requires everything, and that giving everything to the work is what he chooses to do. He has framed the absence of conventional personal milestones not as loss, but as alignment with something he considers more important than those milestones. He believes he is doing necessary work. He believes that the documentation of paranormal phenomena, the preservation of haunted objects, the investigation of locations where dark history accumulated, serves some larger purpose that justifies the personal cost. Whether that belief is a genuine spiritual conviction or a coping mechanism built over decades of unusual choices is the kind of question that cannot be answered from outside. Probably both things are true simultaneously, in the way that most foundational human beliefs contain both sincere conviction and protective function in proportions that shift across time. What the headlines consistently miss about Zak Bagans at 49 is this: the story is not primarily about ghosts. It was never primarily about ghosts. The story is about a man who found a framework for existence in his early 20s, committed to it completely, built a life so thoroughly inside that framework that the framework and the life became indistinguishable, and is now experiencing the particular quality of midlife that comes from that kind of total commitment. Not regret, exactly. Not doubt, exactly. Something more specific and more difficult to name. The settled awareness of someone who has paid the price of their convictions and is living in the world that payment built. His body carries the record of his choices. His face, visible in interviews and social media appearances through 2025 and into 2026, shows the specific kind of aging that comes not from hardship exactly, but from intensity, from years of late nights in cold buildings, from the accumulation of adrenaline responses triggered repeatedly across decades, from the psychological weight of a worldview that places genuine malevolence at the center of the universe and positions the investigator as someone willingly standing at its edge. He has never walked away. That is perhaps the most remarkable thing. He has had every financial opportunity, every cultural opportunity, every practical opportunity to redirect towards something safer and softer. He has not taken any of them. The haunted museum is not the choice of a man who is winding down. It is the choice of a man who is going deeper. What is still open, what remains genuinely unanswered, is the question of cost. Not in dollars, in the currency of human experience. The friendships he did not form because the schedule would not allow them. The relationships that ended against the specific gravity of his singular focus. The versions of his life that closed as he walked further into the specific and demanding territory that defines everything he has made and everything he is. Those costs are real even if they are invisible in the footage, and they are the unspoken subject of every interview he has given in the last several years. What has been eliminated as possibility for Bagans is the conventional life. That door closed a long time ago, and he closed it deliberately. The question that is still open is whether the life he built in its place, the museum, the investigations, the mythology, the total identification with a mission that most of the world regards as at best eccentric and at worst delusional, whether that life provides the thing that all human lives require to be sustainable. Not fame, not money, not even purpose. Whether it provides enough genuine human connection to carry a person through the years ahead. At 49, Zak Bagans is still working. He is still filming. He is still acquiring objects, still walking into buildings that most people would not enter, still claiming to feel things that most people will never feel. The empire he built is real, and it is sustained by his continued presence at its center. The question is not whether the machine keeps running. The question is what the machine costs the man who is still feeding it. That question does not have an answer today, but it is the right question, and it is the one that the headlines, focused on the ghosts and the gadgets and the ratings numbers, have never quite managed to ask.